Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Soybeans are found on dinner tables around the world. Some form of the soybean is found in baby foods, snacks, cooking oils, and many other food items eaten daily. And soybeans provide the protein in the diets for livestock and fish. The Nebraska soybean farmers support research to develop new soy-based products for foods, livestock, and industrial uses through their checkoff dollars. The Nebraska Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Market Journal, television for making agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. This week, Wade Johannes is our marketing analyst. Bryce Anderson looks at winter precipitation changes in the Midwest and growing conditions in South America. Richard Randle talks about cattle care going into winter. And Stephen Wegulo explains how drought and mild weather could impact disease in winter wheat. Wade Johannes from Central Valley Ag is our marketing analyst this week. We spoke with Wade on Thursday morning after the USDA released its World Agricultural Supply and Demand estimates and crop production reports. We talked about exports, ethanol margins, and selling strategy. But we started with the corn numbers in Thursday's reports.
There were some surprises in this report. They were thinking that there was going to be some larger production numbers, possibly from yield. The yield that came out 122 was down 0.8 of a bushel from last month's report. That was a little bit bigger cut than what market was anticipating. But on the production side, they actually increased planted acres by 500,000, which resulted in a 300,000 acre increase in harvested acres. So the total crop ended right at 10.7 billion bushels, which in the end was about what the market had anticipated.
On the soybean side, perhaps more surprisingly, with the reaction of the market, more acres, bigger yield, and the market reacts favorably to it.
Yeah, there was a lot of changes in the soybean numbers. First off, yield increased 2.5 bushels up to 37.8. And the big change came in planted and harvested acres, which both increased by 1.1 million. And the total crop increased by 226 million bushels up to 2.86 billion. That was a huge increase and definitely a surprise to the market.
Let's talk about demand in those two areas then. Let's start in corn, then we can kind of branch around here. But exports in corn have been minimal at best. How does that increase, or does it at all?
Yeah, the best way to describe corn export sales right now is there are none. I mean, it's just nothing out there. And that's a lot of it's due to South America's crop is so much cheaper than the United States crop at this point. If you're China, you can actually get corn delivered from South America cheaper than you can pick it up at the United States. So, where are you going to buy if you're China? It's going to be South America. So in this morning's report, exports were lowered by 100 million bushels. There's probably some more cuts there that can be made in the longer run.
And completely on the other side of that, soybean exports have been out of this world. They raised the export numbers there, but can it continue? Can they get to where they, a huge number? Yeah,
the export sales have been, I think so far for the 2012-2013 marketing year, it's been over 80% is on the books already. So just a huge export sales number so far. But in this morning's report, exports were increased by 210 million bushels, crushed by 40 million bushels. So that huge increase in production was completely offset by a huge increase in demand. And in the end, demand wins the day.
You mentioned China. China had said it was going to produce a large corn crop. The U.S. Grains Council did their tour. They say it's big as well. Does that affect the U.S. market? How much could it affect the U.S. market?
It does in a little, in one sense, in that they're saying that China may not need to import any corn this year. But, in the big scheme of things, exports are such a small drop in the bucket compared to ethanol, compared to feed. It's not a big game changer, but it does add a little bit, or take a little bit of pressure off of the carryout.
Speak to ethanol margins. Any improvement you see there?
It's been brutal. The latest that I've seen is the current spot ethanol margins are the worst in the last 8 years. and grind is just limping along,
right,
basically. And it's going to be a struggle once ethanol plants run out of the sales that they or the purchases they made ahead of this fall. It's going to be a tough battle, and I think we're probably going to see more plants slowing down, shutting down.
I think it's safe to say that most analysts believe that a seasonal high will come next year at some point. How do you look at that? Do you agree that we have to wait a few months until we get back to something that could be a record price?
Well, let's just talk with corn right now. I mean, the high for corn was $8.49 on the December board. And, there's a lot of talk. Actually, I just read another analyst this morning that's saying, well, it's inevitable that the market will take out that high and it'll happen next spring. And that might be the case. The thing that we need to remember, though, is everyone is thinking that right now. What if it's not the case? What if something changes that? So with today's rally, I mean, before I came in this morning, corn was up 35 cents, trading right around 770 futures. If you look at your total crop that you have left to sell 10% of it at these kinds of levels. Don't put 100% of what you have open into next spring's rally. We hope it comes, but what if it doesn't?
Beans on the same side. Do you think there's a smaller window here with beans before that crop from South America gets into the market?
Yeah, the thing with soybeans, there's such a wide range of possible outcomes. Just with an average crop in South America, bean market does not have to go any higher. There are going to be some tight windows in terms of logistics in South America. Getting a record crop out of there is going to be a challenge come next March. But I think we need to also be piecing off sales. And I'm a little bit more supportive to friendly in the soybean market than I am in corn, just because of it's easier to shut down ethanol than it is to shut down China.
This report today, is this as volatile as we could see the markets shift in one day with one report or with one news item for quite a while?
Well, you never say never in this industry.
That's true.
For sure.
One news item could shift it to a limit.
What we know today is might not matter tomorrow. Right. But generally speaking, the January reports, when they come out with the final supply and demand numbers and the final stocks report for this last crop year, that's usually the big game changer in the market. November, December, the monthly stocks, the supply and demand report, that does alter some numbers, but generally speaking, January is the big one.
Next week, we'll look at pork supply and export opportunities with University of Missouri Extension economist Ron Plain. Another week lacking significant precipitation across the state meant farmers could continue, and in some cases finish, harvesting corn and soybeans. But it also means that soils desperately in need of moisture recharge will have to wait yet again. On Wednesday, we talked with Bryce Anderson at DTN in Omaha about the winter weather outlook, growing conditions for South America's corn and soybean regions, and why this year here has been so dry.
One reason why it got so dry this year is that we had, in some cases, a historic strength La Nina in the Pacific back in 2010 and 2011. And actually, that particular feature didn't really kind of give things up until well into this past spring. And so the impact for Nebraska was that conditions started out on the dry side. Then actually there was a little bit of a switch into sort of an El Nino pattern in the Pacific during the heart of the summer. And El Nino during the summer is a dry weather pattern for Nebraska. And so we got kind of hit on both sides of the Pacific features, and the result was the worst drought that we've seen in almost 60 years.
Explain to me, you did a little bit, but explain to me more the characteristics and differences of El Nino versus La Nina.
Well, with La Nina, the water temperature in the equatorial Pacific region is below normal, and with El Nino, the water temperatures are above normal. The jet stream pattern with a La Nina kind of leaves Nebraska on a very high and dry side. And with El Nino, you can get a little bit more dependable airflow into Nebraska if the feature is sustained enough. But during the summertime with an El Nino, we tend to see, again, a sort of a high and dry pattern with Nebraska not really in the path of a prevailing jet stream wind pattern. And so with those two features going on during the spring and the summertime, we were really left in just a pattern that did not allow for any real sustained rainfall to develop.
The question that I hear from a lot of farmers, or the concern is, you know, they say this is fine for 1 year, this drought that we currently are in, but if it's another year or two, then we have big problems. So what are the arguments for and against that?
Well, the argument for the chance of this drought repeating is that years that the predominant portion of the central United States has a big drought like we had this year, well, those years generally tend to repeat. There's a pretty high probability of that going on. And that's happened almost a dozen times in the past 100 and some years. And that has indeed been the case. So that is a feature right there, that droughts, you know, tend to hang around for a while. On the other side, there is the prospect that some of the benefits, if the Pacific goes into a weak El Nino this fall and winter, will start showing up in at least southwestern Nebraska. And we started to see a little bit of that during the past few weeks. And so there are portions of the state that maybe have a little bit higher chance of not having as dry a scenario next year as they did this year.
I know I hear a lot of climatologists say that forecasts, when you go out a couple of months, it's so hard to predict accurately. But when you look through winter, what do the models show could happen or is most likely to happen?
Right now there's a real back and forth going on in terms of the winter forecast, but I think that the likelihood is that this winter we will not see as pervasive a dry pattern as we did last winter. But I don't think that we're going to see much more than normal wintertime precipitation. And you know, that would help out a little bit, but really not very much. And along with that, I think we're going to see a colder winter than we did last winter. Last winter was so warm that that really kind of blew through the roof as far as any real patterns are concerned. So I think that we're going to see both a colder winter with a little bit more precipitation. And as far as will this be enough to really make a difference in the soil moisture profiles, I think it's going to be very minimal, just because in wintertime you don't get that much moisture that really gets into the ground anyway.
I want to drop down to South America for a second and take a look at Brazil and Argentina. There are major implications there when you look at corn and soybean markets. What's a normal weather pattern for them during the growing season, and does it look like it will in fact be normal? Normal
patterns for Brazil are that the conditions show kind of periodic rainfall off and on in their major soybean areas. And in Argentina, they usually get a little bit dry during the middle portion of their growing season, which is January and into February. Right now, Argentina's had the benefit of some very good rains, and so they have good soil moisture for their crops. Brazil has been much more variable. Southern Brazil has been wet. The big growing areas in central Brazil, especially Mato Grosso, have been dry recently. They may get some rainfall here going into the next couple weeks, but they are probably going to be battling some dry weather concerns throughout much of the start of their growing season. And that's a big issue because Brazil is expected to produce 80 million tons of soybeans this year, a record by a long ways, and they are depending on good rainfall, obviously, to be able to do that.
We'll have a look at this week's weather outlook later in the show with Al's forecast. While livestock feeders will still face tight grain supplies through winter, farmers and ranchers with cattle have not only had to buy high-priced corn, but they also face a lack of forages. The latest National Agricultural Statistics Service report said 97% of the state's pastures are in poor or very poor condition. We talked with UNL Extension beef veterinarian Richard Randle in Meade this week about both the normal seasonal prep for cattle producers and about how drought has changed the timing of some management decisions.
Well, obviously with the difficult challenges we've had this year, there have been early weaning taking place, so calves coming off of cows early. There has been early preg checking going on and trying to find those cows that aren't productive, open, or having other problems. and trying to remove them because of feed shortages as early as possible.
Let's move into some of those individually. Preg checking, you said some has already gone on.
That's right. I've been talking to a number of vets across the state, and a fair amount of early preg checking has taken place, but there's still a vast number of animals out there that are still in need of preg checking, and this is getting closer into that normal time that occurs.
What do you look for in those cows, body score wise, and even those open cows?
Well, we're looking obviously to find those animals that are going to be at a disadvantage going into the winter. So we'd like to see the body condition in those cows at least 5.5 at this point in time in preg check. We'd like to see those young animals, especially first calf heifers, that could be at a bigger disadvantage to be up there at that 5.5, maybe even pushing 6. But recognize with the feed shortages that we've already had, likelihood is that there's going to be a number of those animals that are going to be lower condition than we normally like to expect. And so we need to think about paying closer attention to those animals going into the winter to ensure that they're not going to get so far behind. It's going to really affect us next year as we try to breed back.
Not really much you can do at this point with just the amount of forages that there really aren't.
That's true, other than recognizing that those particular animals that are at high risk, like those young first calf animals, might need to be thought about in terms of different feeding strategies, separating them from adult animals so the competition wouldn't be there. And in addition to finding those open cows that we certainly don't want to carry over the winter, we want to maybe look at a little closer culling from the standpoint of things like teeth, eyes, feet and legs, udders, culling a little deeper into those herds, any of those animals that might have some of that disadvantage.
So you see more culling that could go on here as we go through maybe the next month or so?
Well, I would certainly expect so. We've got some hard decisions to make going into the winter time after this difficult summer, and we need to have that herd as compact as possible, dealing with these short feed sources and recognizing that our biggest concern is going to be reproductive performance next year. And a lot of that's going to be dependent on how they come through the winter, and starting right now is the time to set that up for as much success as possible.
You touched on this. We've seen some early weaning that already went on a month or so ago. What's the condition of those calves or those cows that are coming off?
Certainly those calves that have been early weaned, different market avenues for them. Some of them, in the worst case scenarios, went right straight to market. Some of those calves were probably held for a period of time on site and may be still there and going through the normal marketing processes now. One of the concerns that we would have is those that have not early weaned may have some calves that they're weaning, but rather than normally backgrounding them like they might, because of shortages may be moving on into the market avenues, so those animals may not have the typical backgrounding set up for them like we'd like to see them have in some cases.
And as you saw in the background, a quick harvest is allowing cattle producers an early opportunity to graze in cornfields. For crop producers looking to rent out corn stalks this fall, the Crop Watch website has a tool to help you and your renter agree on an appropriate price. Nebraska is part of a multi-state project designed to improve the adoption of mobile information tools for wheat growers. In the October Nebraska Farmer, you can read about iWheat. UNL Extension entomologist Jeff Bradshaw says the USDA-funded research project will develop monitoring systems for key wheat pests, establish a network for early detection of diseases, and improve economic margins for growers. Bradshaw says Nebraska's primary focus in iWheat is the wheat stem sawfly. You can read more about the project in the October Nebraska Farmer. Winter wheat in the state was 81% seeded as of the latest NASS Crop Progress and Condition Report. Just as corn and soybeans had to fight through drought this summer, UNL Extension plant pathologist Stephen Wegulo says dry soils could also present disease challenges for wheat growers.
Well, this year we had a lot of drought, dry conditions, no rain, and one group of diseases that we often overlook is root and crown rot diseases. These diseases are caused by two groups of fungi. One group is called Fusarium and another group is called Bipolaris. So those two genera of fungi cause crown and root rots in wheat. And those root diseases are favored by water stress. So the drought that we had, and which is continuing even right now as we speak, actually predisposes wheat plants to attack by those fungi. So now planting is just about done in Nebraska, and if the soil was dry, those conditions are very favorable for the root and crown rot diseases to develop.
If there's a mild winter in Nebraska, and you could say we probably had a mild winter last year as well, but if there's a mild winter this year in Nebraska, how does that affect what can happen?
Well, if there's a mild winter, there are several things that can happen. One, if we have rain, then lots of different diseases can develop. For example, the rust, stripe rust and leaf rust, we have in the past seen some of those going on to fall, the fall-winter crop. And also we have virus diseases, for example, wheat streak mosaic virus, which is transmitted by the wheat caul mite. The mite survive a lot better and reproduce a lot better when temperatures are warm. So if we have a warm winter, then we may see wheat streak mosaic virus more severe next growing season. We also have another virus disease known as barley yellow dwarf virus. It's transmitted by wheat caul mite. It's transmitted by aphids. And so with barley yellow dwarf virus, if the winter is mild and the fall is mild and we have rainfall,
right,
then the aphids can survive more, and we could expect to see more of the barley yellow dwarf virus as well.
The diseases, the problems that you've mentioned, what can growers do to try to minimize the impact?
Well, it depends on the type of disease. So for some diseases, for example, the root and crown rots, we recommend treating seed with fungicide to control those fungi. But if farmers have already planted,
right,
then what they can do is, if they have irrigation, they can irrigate in order to reduce that water stress that would result if there is little moisture, and that will help to to reduce infections. But if it's dry land, then they have to rely on Mother Nature. Hopefully we'll get some rain. If it's virus diseases, there is little that can be done once viruses have infected. But for the next growing season, which would be in 2014, later in 2013, they want to make sure that they control volunteer wheat and other volunteer grasses, which usually are hosts of the wheat caul mite, which transmits wheat streak mosaic virus, and also hosts of the aphids, which can transmit barley yellow dwarf.
Even though a majority of winter wheat has been seeded in Nebraska, the 31% emerged is well behind the normal pace of 62%. Dealing with unwanted horses is a growing problem across the nation. Especially in drought years, it can be difficult to find adequate feed sources for horses due to high hay prices and insufficient pastures. UNL Extension horse specialist Kathy Anderson says there are other factors that can also lead to unwanted horses.
People just, don't need them. They might become lame, they might become injured. A person's lifestyle might change. Maybe they got these horses for their kids whose interests change and they don't really need them or are not interested in them anymore. So it can be a whole variety of reasons why they become unwanted. And it's tough to try to find the next spot for them to go for some of them.
Next week, Curtis Harms will report on options people have when dealing with unwanted horses. And now to forecast his weather outlook for the coming week. Here's UNL Extension State Climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here we are again for the main forecast for this next 7-day period. But before we get to that forecast, let's take a brief overview of the last week. Of course, last weekend we've seen the very cold air move into the state. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, the Panhandle and portions of southwest Nebraska received anywhere from a trace of snowfall up to 6-7 inches in some isolated spots. So some welcome moisture. In terms of water equivalency, generally 1/4 to a 1/2 inch was very common total, so we'll take everything we can get. And then, of course, the other piece of energy that moved into our region was associated with an upper air low that moved out of the southwest into the central plains yesterday and is progressing its way through the state today. That brought some thunderstorm development, and we are still looking for some continued thunderstorm development, at least in extreme eastern Nebraska, with some clearing conditions in western Nebraska. So let's take a look at the main forecast for today and what we might expect as we go through the remainder of the 7-day forecast. And here's the energy associated with that upper air trough. We could see some thunderstorm development, particularly in east central and southeast Nebraska during the prime heating hours of the afternoon before the cold air starts to move in and the energy itself moves east of the state. Now, the only fly in the ointment for additional rainfall across eastern Nebraska will be if we get a line of thunderstorms developing from central Oklahoma up into central Kansas. That could rob some of the potential moisture coming into eastern Nebraska. But overall, we should see clearing skies in the west, and in the east, probably our clearing will not occur until we get into the late evening hours. Now, as we go into tomorrow, we'll see that trough weakens as it moves toward the northeast, and we'll see kind of a west-northwest flow. We'll see slightly cooler conditions than we experienced today. Highs will probably be somewhere in the low to mid-60s across extreme northeastern Nebraska. As you get closer to south and southwestern Nebraska, we still may make it up into the upper 60s to the low 70s. Now, as we get into Monday, we'll notice that a piece of energy is trying to come into the Pacific Northwest and will rapidly move toward the Plains region, but overall we should see a fairly dry day. We'll be looking at highs that will be approximately close to the 80-degree mark in southwest Nebraska, and we'll be looking at the low to mid-70s across northeast Nebraska. As we go into Tuesday, here comes that energy poised to come into our region. Because it's a very fast-moving front, we're not expecting a lot of moisture with this system, as the Gulf will remain closed and will not be entrained into this system. So overall, we'll be just expecting some light showers and possibly some general stratiform rain across the Dakotas moving into northern Nebraska. Overall, we'll be looking at highs that will be in the mid-60s across the north to approximately the mid-70s across extreme southern Nebraska. As we go into Wednesday, that energy is now well to the south and east of us. We may see some residual cloud cover across eastern Nebraska. Much cooler conditions. We'll be looking at highs in the upper 50s across the northeast to approximately the 70-degree mark across extreme southwestern Nebraska. Then the high builds back in. We start to see warmer conditions. We'll be looking at highs 62 in the northeast to about 76 across the southwest. And we'll be pretty much benign conditions as we get into Friday. 58 to 60 in the north, to around 70 across the south. 8 to 14-day forecast takes the warm air to our east. And in terms of precipitation, most of the moisture remains south and east of the state.
Thanks, Al. For more ag information throughout the week, be sure to follow us on Facebook and Twitter. You can also see past interviews and segments on the Market Journal mobile app, available on the iTunes and Google Play stores. Next week, Ron Plain is our marketing analyst, and we'll talk with Chuck Hibbert, the new Dean and Director of UNL Extension. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board. The Soybean Checkoff, growing opportunity from the ground up. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln Extension, where you can know how, know now. Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Soybean Board.
Animal agriculture is vital to Nebraska. Livestock production not only contributes to our food supply, but also helps our rural communities. Livestock provides revenue for schools, creates jobs, supports Main Street, and enhances the future for farm families. The Nebraska Soybean Board's Animal Agriculture Initiative works to encourage growth of responsible livestock enterprises to benefit agriculture and Nebraska.